Okay, good evening, folks. Welcome back to Migweek. Thanks for joining us again. It's lovely to have you aboard. Hope you're having a good Migweek so far in a strange but connected manner. It's going well here on the coast. I'm not even going to talk about the birds and the birding because that's just really not fair at all. We're here to try and sort of, give you a Migweek experience. Hopefully, we're doing our best, technology notwithstanding. And this is our third talk of the week, third talk of 5. And it's going to be great to talk to Sorrel in a few minutes. Really looking forward to the next half hour or so. Before we get on with that stuff, let me just remind you of a few bits and pieces. Firstly, any questions for Sorrel, please do put them in the chat alongside the screen you're watching right now. We are particularly keen for your questions this evening because it's far more of a kind of discussion scenario. So please do and get them in as early as you can as well. That would be much appreciated. There's a little survey, again, at the top of the chat. If you've got a couple of minutes, that's just to let us know how you think this format is working out. That would be appreciated. Don't worry if not. To rewatch the video from the beginning, there will be a link on the Migweek website, which you will find on there tomorrow. So you'll be able to rewatch at any time as of tomorrow, basically. On the Migweek website, just search for Mini Migweek 2020. That's Mini Migweek 2020. Thanks again to all our partners for Migweek 2020. That's the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. Thank you so much for hosting us. Yorkshire Coast Nature, as always, massively supportive. RSPB Bempton Cliffs, and Flamborough Bird Observatory, of course. If you feel so inclined and you want to part with some dosh, it's always worth joining one of those groups, especially such a great bird observatory as Flamborough. I'm not getting paid to say that. That's completely my opinion, okay? Otherwise, yeah, as far as this evening goes, we'd also like to mention there's a really cool trail up at Bempton Cliffs, RSPB, which has been created by Poppy, the seasonal assistant up there. It's a very cool migration trail. Details of that on our website as well. So if you do happen to be up at Bempton, enjoy that. It's a very cool thing that's happening there. And I should also say, Poppy is leaving Bempton. It's the end of her term, as it were. And we do hope she goes on to great things, and we do hope she comes back to work in the area. It's been a pleasure knowing you, Poppy. And on the same theme, if you like, also staying at Bempton briefly, I just saw that Angela Belk, a wonderful volunteer who many local people know, has just finished serving 30 years volunteering for RSPB Bempton, which is just insane. 30 years and still going strong, and she's inspired and educated and helped so many people along the way. So congratulations, Angela. We think you're great. Keep it up. And do please give us feedback as we keep going along. We've had amazing feedback so far from Migweek. I'm getting bombarded with messages. We're getting loads of emails and texts and WhatsApps, and it just really feels like we are part of something together, and it is working out in these, bizarre times, and we're adapting accordingly and happily, I hope. Right, that's all that stuff out of the way. Without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Sorrel. Now, Sorrel Lyall, she's a young birder and a trainee ringer, and she's currently studying ecology at Edinburgh, and she's campaigning for better representation and inclusivity in the birding and nature community. And Sorrel's going to talk to us this evening about diversity, the issues surrounding it, and hopefully what we can do to improve diversity in the birding community. So Sorrel, looking forward to passing over to you now, and we'll have a Q&A session whenever you're ready. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks for having me. Really honoured, thank you. So yeah, I'm Sorrel. I'm just going to share some honest reflections on speaking up recently about the lack of diversity in birding, sort of the motivations behind it, why we need these conversations, and then some of the outcomes, both positive and negative. And I'm going to be speaking from my perspective as a young birder. I'm from Nottingham, half white British, half Indian. And I got into birding through my white British grandparents when I was quite young. And I've been into birding for years and years now. But I've always felt slightly out of place at nature events and at local bird club conferences, and when I walk into a hide. It's been very rare that I've seen someone I can identify with, someone like me who's doing this hobby. And it's been rare that I've seen figures in the conservation sector in jobs I aspire to that I can identify with. And it can really put you off attending events and taking opportunities and applying for things, and even going to nature reserves in the first place. And it's always been something that's been in the back of my mind, but recently it's bubbled to the surface more. So with the Black Lives Matter movement earlier in the year, I was really angered to see tweets and comments from people in the birding community and from official birding accounts condemning the protests and condemning the movement. And it kind of just made me think, is this the image that we're creating as a community, that we're narrow-minded and we're excluding people? And I was thinking that, and I was wondering how many other people are feeling sort of alienated by the birding community when we all have this common ground and this common love of birds. So this prompted me to want to find out more from the birding community. So I sent out an anonymous survey on Twitter asking for the opinions and the experiences of minority group birders, and sort of people's thoughts and barriers, what they thought the barriers were to people of ethnic minorities, or dependent on gender identity, on sexual orientation, on age, socioeconomic status, disability, or being female in this male-dominated hobby. So I'm just going to read out some of the responses that I had to this survey asking for people's experiences, because I think they really speak for themselves. So I felt my background makes me not British enough for British birds. I felt uncomfortable being the only non-white person. People took photos of me and called me a rarity and used my photo on social media without my permission. When it comes to joining nature groups, there is a subconscious tension due to my gender and sexuality. There are no open arm welcomes or anything to suggest you may be welcome or that it's a safe space. I've received homophobic remarks on a few occasions, mostly from older male birders. I've faced sustained threats and racially based bullying in a national bird club. I've faced sexist remarks. My skills and time are not equally valued or appreciated. I instantly found the grumpy old man syndrome in hides very off-putting. Hides are intimidating to enter. And finally, I've witnessed racism in birding. It's never to the person's face, it's always to a perceived safe audience. So these are some of the quotes I had, and it was clear that many people are experiencing these issues of feeling unwelcome and feeling unsafe in the birding world. And it was clear that simply assuming that your club or your nature reserve, your conference, your organization is open and inclusive isn't enough. We need to be active on it. We need active promotion on diversity. And to publicize this action to help remove some of these barriers. So I published some of these quotes in an article and on Twitter, faced a backlash of tweets and comments with gaslighting and undermining. A couple of the responses I received were, not sure a problem isn't being invented here. Sorry, but it all sounds a bit silly. What barriers could there possibly be? And stop virtue signaling. So, I mean, receiving a lot of comments like that, it really makes you question whether there's any truth in what you said. But then you remember that you're relaying your own experiences and other people's lived experiences, and it's not made up, it's real, and too many people are facing issues like these in the sector. And too many people in birding are disregarding that these experiences are happening altogether. So it's clear we need more conversation around this. So I want to see a birding community that is relevant to today's multicultural and diverse society. 13% of the UK's population are Black, Asian, mixed, or part of another ethnic minority group. But the conservation sector does not reflect that. And I want to see a community that reaches out to those that don't have equal access to nature, with outreach in urban areas, in deprived areas, in areas of high ethnic diversity. And if we think about what the barriers are to accessing nature for ethnic minorities, I'd suggest that there's a large cultural aspect. For example, my Indian grandparents moved to Leeds in the 1960s to work. They didn't pursue hobbies and they didn't encourage hobbies in their children or their grandchildren. They didn't have the disposable income to pursue a hobby like birding, whereas my white British grandparents have been birding since the 1960s. So in my opinion, there's a clear cultural barrier, as well as a socioeconomic barrier, as birding and nature requires free time, it requires transport and often expensive equipment. So not everyone can pick up a pair of fins and go to a nature reserve. And it seemed that this is quite a novel concept to a lot of people. But birding is excluding people who want to access nature or people that don't yet know the benefits of nature. And this is why outreach is so important. So I want to see a representative conservation sector, but representative without the tokenism, without relying on the few people of colour currently in the sector to find all the answers. And I've been speaking to other people of colour in the sector recently who feel the same pressures. And whilst we're really passionate about these issues and we really want to do what we can, it too often feels like the weight is on our shoulders and that we need to solve these issues on our own. And if we don't take the action, who will? And it's draining, it's a heavy subject, it's emotive, it's very personal. And we burn out. I know I have a recurring worry that I'm not at all qualified to talk on these issues. So these support networks of people of colour in the industry are needed, but they should not be relied upon to find the answer. It's the organisations who need to take action and clear action to remove the barriers that prevent access to nature for people who currently feel marginalised. And this starts with the leadership of organisations and everyone joining the conversation and actioning clear policies, zero tolerance policies on all forms of discrimination with clear action to follow it up. We need better representation of diversity in the media, in the conservation media, in conservation roles, in panel discussions, on social media. We need role models and mentoring for minority groups in the sector. When you have support from someone who gets it, from someone who understands the issues, you don't have to explain yourself to, you don't have to explain why you're feeling the way you are. It really makes a difference. And I'm really grateful to have some amazing women of colour who I can go to for advice, or just for someone to listen without having to explain everything again. So these support networks are really needed. So as I said already, we need outreach. Organisations need to increase engagement for marginalised groups. And we need to, most importantly, listen to minority groups and include the voices of minority groups in decision making. So a lot of organisations are really making progress on this. There's been a lot of conversations recently, in recent months. So for example, the RSPB has equality, diversity and inclusion champions. The BTO has a diversity working group, as does the Wildlife and Countryside Link. Wildlife Trusts are taking action and many organisations are joining this conversation. But there are some organisations that have yet to join the conversation. And from a purely pragmatic perspective, how can an organisation expect to sustain itself into the future if it's not representative and if it's not relevant to today's society? How can we fight this global biodiversity and climate crisis if we're excluding people? So I'm optimistic that we will see a change in the conservation sector in time, with more conversations like these, more action, and with clear transparency from organisations on the action that they are taking and the action that they still need to take. So that's my take on the issues of diversity in birding, just some personal reflections. And I'm going to pass back to Mark for some questions. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Sorrel. Yeah, fascinating and thought-provoking. Can you see and hear me okay? Jolly good, jolly good. Yeah, lots to chew on. I'm going to go straight to a bunch of questions we've received, if that's okay with you. Some of these will overlap with what you've been talking about, but possibly an opportunity to develop on those things. Interestingly, the first one we had was, do you think you would have developed a passion for birds if your maternal grandparents had not taken you out to look at nature?
No, probably not. I think a lot of the stories I've heard from young people who are into birds, it's through some inspirational sort of figure. So for me, that was my grandparents, but for other people, it's a certain teacher in school or something. So it definitely takes someone to spark that interest. And if I hadn't had that through my family, then I'm not sure I would have. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's from Sue. And another question from Sue was, do you think opportunities for introducing birds and nature in an inspiring way should be aimed at parents for potential to pass on this knowledge, or children to spark the interest?
I think education and outreach to young people and schools is really probably the key way to inspire people, inspire the next generation. I think there's great potential, and I think there's lots of young people out there who would be really inspired by nature who haven't had access to it yet, if that makes sense. And so I think, yeah, I definitely think that's the way to go.
It makes a lot of sense. Can I ask you what your experience was personally at secondary school? Was there any encouragement in that direction at all?
So I think, like a lot of other young birders, I was the only one in my school who was interested in it. Yeah, definitely not alone in being alone in that respect. And then, yeah, so there was maybe a couple of teachers in my school who were interested, but without that kind of peer support, it's very challenging to kind of explore these things on your own. So if there were these networks already in place in schools, showing that like going to a nature club isn't weird, it's a normal hobby, then I think a lot more people would feel comfortable attending and getting involved.
I think you're right. I mean, just to hopefully make you feel better, you should have seen what it was like in the 1980s. I mean, from a birder's perspective at school,
yeah,
it was just ridiculous. Niche doesn't even cover it, but it was. I was wondering if there was any, from an older person like myself, if there was any sort of, tangible, positive influence at school from, what we might want to call the Springwatch effect, i.e. the, mainstreamizing, if you like, of nature. Did that happen at all at school, do you feel?
I think it definitely makes more people talk about it at school, more people that maybe wouldn't have, like, and with David Attenborough and things, that like everyone would watch that even if they didn't class themselves as an environmentalist. So yeah, I think that kind of mainstream aspect of nature is important. But then I think the sort of more individual level, local level, direct engagement is really vital.
Yeah. Was the capacity for excuse me, for a nature club or a birding club at your school?
There was when I tried to set it up, but before that, not really.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Right. Okay. A question from Beck. Beck says, to what extent do you think diversity in birding, you actually touched on this, is affected by the expense of optics? And what do you think could be done about this?
Yeah, I think that's a big aspect of it. I was actually quite surprised. A lot of the tweets and responses I got were people saying, oh, well, anyone can pick a pair of bins and go out to the local nature reserve. Well, in that very phrase, that's not true. Bins are expensive. Even cheap bins are expensive. People have many other priorities for their money. So yeah, I think that's a big barrier to people. And what could be done? I think this lending on of equipment. It's something we're trying to do with the BTO youth engagement scheme, trying to set up a equipment loaning or passing on old equipment. I think something like that would be really good for young people and for people that can't afford optical equipment, because I think lots of people have spare equipment lying around. So I think that's a good way. And then grants, or it's a tricky one because equipment is really expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
have any optics companies kind of offered support or stepped forward at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think the program is still in planning stages,
Yeah.
but no, there's definitely companies that want to help with this. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So a question from Charlotte, who says, what are some of the major barriers facing people of minority entering areas like ecology?
As in sort of as a degree, I assume, or like career path. I guess it follows similar lines. At university, I found birding and nature to be a lot more diverse, because I think university generally has a more diverse cohort of people, maybe, or certainly. Okay, so from we've started up a bird club at Edinburgh University, and we have quite a diverse membership group, and I think that is inherently because it's drawing from a student group. So I don't know if I'm best qualified to say on the routes into ecology as a degree, because in my experience, university is the place where I've found birding to be the most diverse. But I think there's definitely still there's barriers to education and university education. Of course, socioeconomic barriers. So I think those socioeconomic barriers are very much in line with the barriers to ethnic minorities.
Right. A good question from a friend of mine, Graham, here says, could you ask Sorrel if you could expand on her view, expand on her view of the support of peers through social media as being important?
So like a social media support network of
I think the point really being how important is it to have or not have support of peers via social media?
I think it's really important. From a young birding perspective, when I found a load of other young birders online when I didn't know anyone in my area, that made a huge difference. So the same thing happened with, and it is happening for ethnic minorities. There's definitely people are making these connections through social media. I think social media is a great platform for doing that. I mean, I've learned recently social media has its great, the potential for connecting people, but then also it has a really nasty side to it as well. So there's definitely two sides. But yes, I think support networks through social media is a great way to tackle it.
I had the pleasure of reading that thread which you began, and it was completely fascinating and eye-opening for me. Obviously, hopefully in positive ways, but my God, just the representation. Obviously, it's an echo chamber, and obviously it's a kind of minority of trolls and all the rest of it, and he who shouts loudest, all that nonsense. But was just completely amazed at the kind of willful ignorance of people I know in the birding community. There was various people I knew on that thread, thankfully not friends, but associates who I'm sort of familiar with, and just those things about that kind of what's the problem angle, that and well, I'm not a racist, like as if it's kind of aimed at them, and as if that's ever going to be enough to address issues like this.
Yeah, completely. And I had some more out of the blue responses the other day, a long Twitter thread sort of attacking it all again. It's really dispiriting, but it also shows that these conversations are clearly needed, because the conservation sector isn't doing enough.
No, I think I'm interested in Graham's question and your thoughts there, because we do increasingly, rightly or wrongly, live in a world which is kind of heavily influenced by social media. And do you feel the birding community do you feel supported? Do you feel personally supported by any kind of community out there?
I definitely think the majority of the birding community is supportive of this. Definitely, it's been overwhelmingly positive, but it's also been surprisingly negative. It did definitely take me by surprise. I naively forgot that Twitter trolls kind of existed. I've never been involved in anything like that before. So yeah, it did come as a bit of a surprise. But I think, yeah, the birding and nature community is overwhelmingly supportive. And I think it's just organizations are realizing that whilst they might assume that they're opening and accessible, actually these people experiencing these issues don't feel like these organizations are welcoming to them. So it's just about changing the way that we address these issues, and not just assuming, and actually doing, clear action on it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question from Rare Bird Alert here. Does birding need to be made more cool in order to attract a youthful and diverse audience? Or do you think enough will love it if they can just get that initial contact?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think maybe it will become more mainstream rather than cool if it's marketed more as a mindfulness mental health remedy. Because I mean, obviously, lots of us in birding realize these benefits, but I think there's lots of people that don't realize the benefits of birding in that way. So I think if it was made more mainstream in that sense, then I think it would become more popular, and then in itself it becomes more cool. But how you would make birding cool to teenagers, I think it's very difficult. It was kind of like, it got to a point where being so interested in something became cool, even if what I was interested in wasn't necessarily cool, if that makes sense. So yeah. I think making something cool is just more people being interested in it and giving it a go. So it's just how we go about that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about the kind of holistic mindfulness nature of it, because we can be, very guilty of being, very niche, I think, and very thriving on the more kind of sharp end, kind of, finding rarities, blah, 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 end of birding. And that's, I mean, I would have thought to any 10 or 15-year-old, just a completely ridiculous alien world. But it's interesting, do you think what do you think the routes could be to introducing more ethnic diversity? What routes could be taken through that mindfulness and that kind of holistic nature, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a big avenue for that. An outreach in areas of high ethnic diversity, I think, are really important. There's some, I think the London Wildlife Trust has done or is doing some really effective outreach in urbanized areas in London, and that's having a really positive effect. And then, yeah, I mean, so I don't know if specifically mindfulness and is the way to target ethnic minorities, if that makes sense, but it's just bringing more people into birding and into nature, definitely, and inherently that, hopefully, if you push that, it will make it, or make that movement inclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's funny you should mention London Wildlife Trust, because I had the pleasure of working for London Wildlife Trust for a good number of years, and I worked on projects which were, in so-called deprived areas. It was the Cockney Sparrow project was a big one, and the Walthamstow wetlands was another one. And my personal experience, my positive experience, for what it's worth, was that basically taking it to the people, if you like, i.e., going onto the estates, going into the schools, and not forcing anybody or expecting anybody to do anything, but just literally kind of having a presence and trying to make it interesting and trying to get people involved. And my personal experience on the estates and in the schools was that the kind of ethnic issues were less of an issue in those areas where people were focusing on something together, if you see what I mean. So working in places like King's Cross and Hackney and Brixton, and people were working together from all racial backgrounds and all cultures, because they were whatever, making their schoolyard into a reserve, or digging a pond, or putting up bird feeders together and monitoring it together. And my experience, without cracking on too long, apologies, was that we have to be there. We have to get in there, as opposed to saying, well, the door's always open, because that's just, it's not good enough, is it, really?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It shows, well, yeah, that's a very good example of it. I think we need more of that.
It was, I think London Wildlife Trust do a particularly sterling job with that, but I think it would be interesting and good to see more NGOs who operate in urban areas taking more risks and, you know, spending their membership in arguably a more constructive manner, if you like. Let me just check if we've got any more questions, Sorrel. Okay. Anne says she thinks it should start in school by taking kids out, there we go, and looking at birds as part of teaching. What do you think of that? Yeah,
I completely agree. It helped to normalize for everyone. Yeah, completely. I mean, there's talk of the natural history GCSE. So I think things like that, providing those kind of opportunities for kids in schools is, yeah, definitely a good thing.
Margaret says, do you mind if we keep cracking on? There's lots of questions. Is that all right?
That's great, yeah.
Margaret says, in an ideal world, what would you see as an ideal nature reserve to welcome all? Man, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
Tough one as well. Take your time.
Yeah, it is. Well, I guess it's for people anyone to be able to go to that reserve and not feel unsafe. So it's how you then go about that. So it's a tough question.
Yeah.
It's how you get there. Yeah. I think specific sort of groups for different minority groups, like group walks. So there's Flock Together in London is a really successful birding group for people of colour in London. So things like that at nature reserves, I think, would be really good. If I went to a nature reserve and saw people I could identify with there, I'd feel much more comfortable going to these places. So I think those kind of steps are what's needed to get to this reserve where everyone just feels like they can go. They're not going to be, they're not going to face any discrimination. They're not going to be unsafe. They're like, you could be a brand new birder and you're not going to be intimidated by other people and that kind of thing. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a really good one, isn't it? It's got me thinking as well. Is there any aspect that you know, from a sort of the way nature reserves are traditionally kind of constructed? I mean, like, it's funny you mentioned about hides and things like being unwelcoming. You know, is there anything sort of physical that you'd like to see changing?
That's tough.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's about the sector as a whole. So like social media around the sector. If there's more representation in the media of diverse people at reserves, things like that will help. But actually, at the reserve itself, I think it's more just changing attitudes. Yeah. That's a tough one.
No, it is. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's a good question. Let's see if we've got any more. I'm having lots flying in via WhatsApp here, so I've got to edit in my head as we go along. This is interesting. Okay, what about the intersectionality of gender and ethnicity? Is it harder to be female and BAME than to be male and BAME, for example?
I mean, I don't know how directly I can compare those because I'm not male and BAME, but I think there's definitely some a lot of issues of sexism in birding that then sort of compound the issues of being an ethnic minority in birding as well. In that survey, there were some really awful responses about some serious cases of sexism. So and I had a lot of responses from a lot of women saying I really resonate with a lot of this. So I think it's tough because then male BAME people also face different pressures and different issues. So it's really hard to compare like that, I think. There's lots of different barriers here. that all need addressing. And yeah, I think that's what I'll say.
Yeah, no, excellent. And more. Jenny asks, she'd love to know where you see your future heading after university. What are your personal hopes and aims?
Oh, I think I'd always thought I'd want to go down the science route, but now the thought of doing a master's or PhD doesn't really appeal. So I think, I want to work in conservation. I'd love to work in engagement and outreach maybe, or I'm not sure, education. Still haven't narrowed it down yet. Still working that one out. But in conservation, doing something. Yeah.
Well, you should know already. It's crazy, isn't it? Like thinking you should know your age. I don't know. So there you go. A question from me. What's your favourite birding place?
Ooh, right now it has to be Musselburgh Lagoons in Edinburgh, because it's a cycle ride from Edinburgh. It's great. It's got great diversity, like a diversity in birds. It's really like, it's a great reserve. I love it there, and it's got wader scrapes. It's good numbers of like bar-tailed godwits, the occasional rarer wader, and then the sea. You've got velvet scoters in the winter in quite big flocks, which I just love. Like I've never seen so many and so well. Like long-tailed ducks, and I love it there. That's current favourite.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Have you been able to get out and about, looking for coastal migration in the last few weeks?
Yeah, I went out on the to the east coast to the nuclear power station in East Lothian. It's a good spot. I managed to get out during the nice easterlies and saw a yellow-browed warbler or two. So
nice, excellent. But that power station's something else. It does glow green. Incredible. Okay, I think that's probably that's a lot of questions, and you've answered them fantastically, Sorrel, and very patiently. We really appreciate that. I've got one, an observation, if you like, and that was you referred to the fact that there's a lot of weight on very few shoulders when it comes to people like yourself, and it kind of got me thinking about asking and hoping you would do this evening for us, and I remember you telling me like, well, but I'm doing this talk then, and I've got this round table there, and blah blah blah, and I just thought, God, really overstretched. So I guess to frame that in a question, do you see more people coming through to shoulder that kind of weight right now? Do you think, is there a light at the end of the tunnel for you, or are you just going to keep plowing away?
No, I think definitely there's more people. There's more support. The support network is growing, if that makes sense. There's more people doing these talks, these conversations. And I mean, personally, because right now I've got a lot on with university, so that's something I've had a hard time with recently, is realizing that it is okay to say no to some things and prioritize sort of other things that are important right now, without feeling like I've got to do all these things because what happens if I don't, that kind of thing. So I think a lot, I know, speaking to other people of color in the sector, like feel the same kind of pressures. So I think it's important for, and this goes with lots of other scenarios where this would happen as well. But I think there's definitely more people, or I don't know how to phrase this, but it's growing, but it does take these conversations to be started. Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight, Sorrel. It's been really engaging and really thought-provoking, and I hope everybody watching has enjoyed it and has gained as much from it as I have. Is there where can we follow you? What can we sort of do to support you from here on?
Oh, thank you. I'm on Twitter. It's just Sorrel Lyall on Twitter. Yep. That's my main kind of birding platform.
Okay, you don't want to flog any baseball caps or anything? T-shirts, badges, I don't know. All right, no worries. Thank you, Sorrel. Wonderful stuff. We look forward to watching and supporting your journey going forward. Just to finish up this evening, folks, what have we got coming up? We've got lots of stuff on the website. Anna's been working really hard on graphics for ringing recoveries. There's a whole range of fantastic, specially made films that Anna's been editing and putting together regarding everything from ringing to local wildlife to migration, all kinds of stuff on there. And there's something fresh on there every day. We have 2 more talks to come. You've got me on Saturday night. It's going to be Saturday night at 8 o'clock rather than 7 o'clock. Because I'm guiding that day, so I have to rush back and start the talk. My talk is about NOCMIG and my kind of beginner's journey in NOCMIG from a kind of enthusiastic amateur's point of view. So I'll be playing lots of little audio clips and showing you lots of squiggles and showing you my very primitive method of doing NOCMIG, which has been absolutely blinding. I'm not sure if anybody saw, but we had record counts of redwings and blackbirds just last night. It was absolutely incredible. We also have on Sunday, we have a brilliant talk from Dave O'Hara, who's the site manager at RSPB Bempton, and he'll be talking to us about 50 years of seabird monitoring at Bempton, and that'll be fantastic. Looking at that kind of lengthy, tasty data set is going to be really fantastic, probably unique, certainly on the East Coast. And lots of other stuff coming up. Do communicate with us, via Twitter, via the website. Thanks a lot for your feedback, everyone. And yeah, finally, thanks again, Sorrel. It was a massive pleasure to have you. Thanks for being on board.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.